So I ended up doing a few updates to the Boolean collections plugin I made a while back. On the right, you'll see what it sort of used to would have looked like when you did a Boolean. The Boolean item would have ended up in a wireframe mode, which I personally do not like. So instead what will happen is it will end up with a translucent material. Let me show you that right now. We'll start by selecting any number of items, and then the base item as our final item, and do a difference, and you'll see that our cutters are now this transparent sort of green color. And assuming YouTube's compression hasn't screwed everything up, you can also see our base mesh in here as well as this sort of darker, redder kind of color. Now if you still want the wireframes, you can change that by going to the actual script and changing the show wireframe from false to true. That's true with a capital T. Another thing we can do now is extract geometry from inside of our mesh and use it as a Boolean without having to leave edit mode. So if I were to add a cube in here and another cube in here for good measure, and if I were to just select a face on each of these and run our difference, you'll see that it extracted geometry and created a new mesh and created our collection and sorted everything out for us without having to leave edit mode, so we can keep on editing our base mesh while we're here. Keep in mind that the Boolean will apply to whatever is your active object, so if you want to select multiple objects and go into edit mode, make sure that your base object is the one that is selected last, because that will be your active object. Another thing that's different is that the final mesh item that ends up in our base collection is no longer just our base mesh. Instead, it is this cube.002_build. Our collection is still going to be called the cube.002, and everything that affects it still ends up in that collection. But our base item now only exists inside of this collection. And the reason we're doing this is because our base item is no longer the item that has the booleans applied to it. If you look at the modifiers, you'll see that there's nothing here. The reason I did this is because it makes it more convenient to edit our base item. So if we look at the old example and we try to edit our base mesh, you'll see that we can't see what's going on with the booleans active. So if I were to try to bevel this edge, for example, you can't see what's going on underneath with the booleans, which was inconvenient. But now, if we edit our base item, you'll see that the booleans are still active, and we can edit that edge while seeing what's happening with the booleans. This works because our build item is the one that has the booleans on it now, so the very first thing it does is it does a union with the base item, and all the modifiers happen after that onto that union. So if we were to go into edit mode with our build item selected, you'll see that nothing shows up because our build item doesn't actually have any geometry. So if you want to edit your base mesh, make sure you have your base mesh selected and not your build item. Now if you're wondering if that messes up doing things like booleans to other booleans, for example, if I wanted to add a cylinder here and cut away from this cube, if you're wondering if that will mess things up because the cube would no longer be the final result of that boolean, I've already taken care of that. So if we do a difference here, you'll see that everything got applied properly. This build item's boolean modifier is now correctly using the cube.003_build instead of just the cube.003. Our script will now go through anything that this cube was cutting away from and update it so that it will now use the final result of its boolean. So we can do something like add another sphere in here and just cut away from this cylinder if we wanted to, and you'll see that everything's still properly affected. In addition, if we were to select this and do a select all boolean modifiers, what will happen is it will select everything that's affecting our build item, but nothing that is actually a build item. So you can see that this sphere is selected as well as this cylinder, but our actual build items are not being selected here. And the reason we're doing this is because our build items don't actually have any geometry. So if you just wanted to move this around, you can still do that without selecting your build items. And when you enter edit mode, you can still edit all of these geometry and your final result will still be visible. So if I select this face and bevel it, you can still see what's happening. And if I were to select this face on our cylinder and move it around, you can still see it affecting everything else as well. Now, if we were to also select one of our build items, for example this cylinder build, and we go into edit mode, you'll see that this sphere is no longer cutting away from that cylinder. Well, it still is cutting away from it, we just can't see it happening while we modify our meshes, which is why we go out of our way to not select our build items when we do a select all boolean modifiers. By the way, in case you were wondering, any of these will still work regardless of if you selected your base item or your build item. Also keep in mind that if you want to do additional modifiers to your items, make sure you do it on your build item and not your base item, because if we were to do a modifier on this cube, so let's do a mirror across this cube across the y-axis, you'll notice that only the cube gets mirrored and none of the other geometry cutting into it or anything like that. And when you do another Boolean onto these things, the modifiers won't get transferred over. So if I wanted to copy this entire thing over, we'd have to select our build item and add a mirror modifier across our cube. And now all that stuff is properly copied. Now, if you don't like these material colors, you can change the defaults by going to scripting and changing the base matte color, which is the material applied to your base item, or the Boolean matte color, which is the material applied to your Boolean items. Additionally, you can just select one of your items and go to its material and change the color there. So if YouTube's compression is making it so you can't actually see what's going on here, we can raise the alpha of this. And this is the base matte color, and on this cube we can change the bool matte color. Now if we were to enter any other shading mode, you'll notice that these materials are no longer transparent. And to fix that, you can go to your material, change the blend mode to additive, hit use nodes, change the surface to transparent BSDF, and rotate your view, and the material will update so that we can no longer see it. We of course have to do the same thing for our base color, so use nodes, change it to transparent, and change the blend mode to additive, and now we can no longer see any of our booleans in our other shading modes. That includes our rendered mode, like so. Alternatively, you can just toggle your collection visibilities, so if I click on these and just toggle all of them, you'll notice that most of them go away, but not the cylinder and the cube, and that is because these are build items. So if you want to hide these, you're going to have to do it yourself. Now, because they are build items, they also won't go away when you do your apply all booleans. So if I go to the cylinder, apply all booleans, you see that the sphere disappears, and so does the collection for that cylinder. And if we do it for this cube, you'll notice that that cube's collection also went away, and the cylinder actually did too. And if I do the same thing for our initial build item, apply all booleans, that cube went away, but these two items stick around because they are build items, so if you want to get rid of them, you have to delete them yourself. One other thing I forgot to mention is that the way you have to do your smoothing is different now. So if I were to edit this face mesh and do something like bevel this face, let's give it some roundness, and I want this to be smooth, I can hit shade smooth, and you'll notice that everything goes weird because that's how things work in Blender apparently. And if we were to go to our object data and go to normals, hit auto smooth, nothing happens. And that's because what we're seeing here isn't actually our base mesh. So if we want our final mesh to be smooth, we have to select our build item, go to auto smooth, and check that box, and that will automatically smooth everything. So if I wanted to round out this cube's corner, we can select our edges and do the bevel. And then on this cube, right click, shade smooth, and everything's smoothed out. If our build mesh didn't have the auto smooth checked, then everything would look weird, so make sure that is auto smoothed. The reason I didn't make it do this by default when you do a boolean is because Blender doesn't have this as the default, so I'm assuming that people don't like working this way for some reason. Anyways, let's finalize this cube, and I got a lot of questions about how to install this in the last video, so I might as well show you that now. You go to Edit, Preferences, go to Add-ons, and Install. Then you find your actual boolean collections.py, and just double click that. And when you do, this is what it's going to look like. The checkbox is not going to be checked. You want to make sure that this is checked. And then hit Save Preferences. To get the actual pie menu to show up, you go to Key Map, 3D View, and you probably want to go to 3D View Global, but I have different keys for my mesh and object mode, so I'm just going to show you the mesh one. Go all the way down until you find the Add New button. Click Add New, expand it, and this is what it's going to look like. Where it says None here, you want to type wm.call_menu_pie. And when you do, this blank space over here will have a new input box for name. And in there, you want to type in object.boolean_collections. And then choose a hotkey you want to use. So for me, I chose Shift-Alt-E when I'm in Mesh Edit mode. And then once again, hit Save Preferences, otherwise it won't actually be saved. Actually, there are two more things I forgot to mention. When you do and apply all booleans, your build mesh will be renamed to built. So keep that in mind if you can't find your build mesh anymore. And also, when you want to do a edit to your base mesh, you might notice that there's some Z fighting going on. I'm not sure if it'll show up on YouTube, but I just rotate this around a bit so you can hopefully see the Z fighting going on. If you don't want that to happen, go to your overlays and hit hidden wire. And that'll just make it so it doesn't actually show the faces of whatever you're editing. When you do that though, your Boolean meshes will no longer show up either, or at least the faces won't show up. So keep that in mind. If you don't see the transparent material anymore, it's because your hidden wire is checked. Uncheck that if you wanted to actually show the material. Anyways, that's it for this video. I know I said I wouldn't do any more updates to this, but I just felt like doing an update for some reason. This still is not a Blender channel. I still use Modo, and nothing about Blender 2.8 has made me want to switch at all, so don't subscribe if you think this is a Blender channel. It really isn't. I swear I'm going to do some more Unreal content at some point, just as soon as I fix my audio issues. It took me 5 tries to make this video, because the audio either didn't record, or my video editor doesn't think it exists, or because in the video editor it's all messed up. I have a lot of audio issues. Anyways, I can't think of anything else to say to pad out this video, so bye.